Have you ever looked around and felt like everyone else is moving forward except you? Someone gets married. Someone starts a new career. Someone buys a house. Someone seems happier, more confident, more certain. And somehow, without anyone saying it directly, it feels like life is leaving you behind. You tell yourself not to compare, but you still do. Because the strange part isn't that other people are moving, it's that their movement somehow makes you question your own. And the real reason this happens has less to do with your life and more to do with how your brain measures progress. Problem deep dive. Most people think this feeling comes from jealousy, but that's usually not what's happening. In fact, many times you're genuinely happy for the people around you. You want them to succeed. You want good things for them. Yet the moment you see their progress, something inside you becomes unsettled. A quiet voice appears. What am I doing with my life? What's painful is that this feeling doesn't stay external. It slowly becomes personal. You stop evaluating your life based on your own goals and start evaluating it based on someone else's timeline. You notice your friend's promotion, your cousin's relationship, your former classmate's success, and suddenly your attention shifts away from your own path. Psychologists call this social comparison, but the experience feels much deeper than that. Because comparison doesn't just affect how you see others, it affects how you see yourself. The more often you compare upward to people who seem ahead, the more your brain begins treating your current position as evidence that something is wrong, even if nothing actually is.
Before answering that question, it's important to understand something. This feeling does not mean you're weak, and it does not mean you're broken. In many ways, it's an adaptation, a very old one. For most of human history, survival depended on understanding your position within a group, who had resources, who had status, who had influence, who was falling behind. Your brain evolved to notice these things because they mattered. Thousands of years ago, being disconnected from the group could be dangerous. Today, that same system still exists, but the environment has changed. Your brain is using ancient software inside a modern world. A world where you can compare yourself to hundreds of people before breakfast. A world where you see everyone's highlights and almost none of their struggles. The result? A survival system trying to process more social information than it was ever designed for. And that's where things start becoming distorted. Psychological mechanism. Think of your brain as having an internal dashboard, a set of gauges constantly asking, am I safe? Do I belong? Am I progressing? The problem is that one of these gauges doesn't measure absolute progress. It measures relative progress. In other words, it doesn't ask, am I improving? It asks, am I improving compared to them? And that's a completely different question. This is known as relative evaluation. The brain often cares more about position than distance traveled. Imagine.
So, how do you stop getting trapped by this pattern? Not by forcing yourself to stop comparing. That rarely works. Instead, you need to change what your brain measures. 1. Track direction, not speed. Ask yourself one question. Am I moving in a meaningful direction? Not, am I moving as fast as someone else? The brain tends to focus on velocity because it's easy to see. But long-term fulfillment comes from alignment.
A person slowly building a life they actually want is often healthier than someone rapidly chasing a life they don't. When you focus on direction, your attention returns to your own path, and attention shapes perception. 2. Create evidence of growth. Your brain forgets progress surprisingly quickly. This is called adaptation. Achievements become normal. Growth becomes invisible. Keep a simple record. A journal, a note, a document. Write down small improvements each week. Maybe you handled a conversation differently. Maybe you set a boundary. Maybe you stayed consistent with something important. These moments seem insignificant, but they provide your brain with evidence, and evidence changes beliefs. 3. Separate visibility from value. One of the biggest psychological traps today is confusing visibility with importance. The things people show are not necessarily the things that matter most of all. Relationships, inner peace, emotional maturity, self-respect. These rarely appear in public, yet they shape life more than many visible achievements. When you remember this, the comparison system begins losing some of its power, because you realize you're comparing your private reality.
Most people compare entire lives. That's overwhelming. Instead, compare yourself to who you were 6 months ago, or 1 year ago. This activates a healthier reference point. You become both the observer and the benchmark. And when your benchmark becomes your past self, growth becomes easier to recognize. Not because you're doing better than everyone else, but because you're doing better than before. Integration. Here's the mental model to remember. Imagine life as a trail through a forest. Most people keep looking sideways, checking where everyone else is, comparing distances, comparing speed, comparing outcomes. But every time you look sideways, you lose sight of your own trail, and eventually you stop noticing how far you've already come. The goal isn't to ignore other people. The goal is to stop using them as your measuring tape, because your path was never supposed to look like theirs, and your timeline was never designed around their milestones. Quiet, empowering close. Maybe everyone isn't moving on. Maybe you're just seeing their movement more clearly than your own. Maybe the growth you're looking for isn't loud enough to notice yet. Maybe it's happening beneath the surface, like roots growing underground before a tree becomes visible. The truth is that progress often feels invisible while it's happening, and obvious only in hindsight. So the next time you feel like everyone else is moving ahead, pause for a moment and ask yourself a different question. Not how far ahead are they, but how far have I come without giving myself credit? Because sometimes the person you're overlooking most is yourself.